Hello there again. Today I'm actually going to talk about a book rather than a film, but it's a book about films. It's Quinten Tarantino's Cinema Speculation, which has just come out. I got it in Kindle. I wasn't paying for the hardback or anything. I did buy the hardback of the Gaff Marenghi book, but I'm not buying the Tarantino book in hardback. So it's him writing about 70s cinema from the time when he was kind of growing up, when he was 20. The films he saw at the time where people start to get their influences in film and things that kind of shape them into who they're going to be. This is what he's writing about, that kind of 10 years where he was getting shaped. So, as he explains in the film, he went to see a lot of grown up films with his mother and her dates and things, and understanding that you had to shut up during the films. He wasn't allowed to watch the films and talk through them like a kid. He had to shut up and watch them. But he would get to see lots and lots of films that, in some cases, probably he might have been a bit young for, but as he said, there's some things, context he didn't understand at the time that he would understand later. But so he saw a lot. So he covers quite a lot in the book about the kind of films he saw, and also goes into detail about some of the people that influenced him and the films that influenced him. And it's an interesting book. It's not perfect, but you can get the sense of why he is the way he is from the book. Why certain things interest him, why certain things don't interest him. You get the impression from this book that he really is not into art house stuff at all. He's just there's a certain kind of filmmaking that he's just not interested in. It's not really his thing. So it's you may appreciate some films in that arena, but the general idea of it is not for him. He's not going to be social conscious films that are meant to be literary. It's not really. He's interested in what actually is effective on film, which and why certain things are effective on film and certain things are effective to the audience. He's very much someone who watched a lot of films with an audience and got an idea of what people like, what people don't like, what are things that really turn them off. He's seen some stuff in the 60s and 70s that were very hippie-ish and very socially conscious that the audiences laughed at. So I think that kind of did help get a bias towards that kind of films. But to be honest, we've all seen, maybe not as young as he did, but we've all seen films that are kind of socially conscious and noble but are kind of laughable. We've all seen them. There's nothing funnier than someone taking themselves seriously, not realising they've missed the point. There's nothing funnier than that. You can sincere incompetence is always hilarious, and even sincere situation where you're kind of missing the point of view of 90% of your potential audience. And you because one of the things in filmmaking is filmmaking's an elitist kind of art form. Most people who make films came from the middle classes. You don't get into film school unless your family has some sort of money, or you got some support by the government to go and do this thing. That's what it used to be like in Britain when I was younger. It doesn't work anymore. Now you get into debt to go and study film, and it's what's the point of doing it? But it's an elitist art form, and a lot of the films made by the people in this art form are about working classes and are about middle classes, and a lot of the time they don't understand, if they're doing a working class film, what makes a working class character or what the working class is like. They're trying to appeal to the media and their own classes that are saying, this is why this works this way, and my friends all say the same, so I'll keep doing this. So that's why you get a lot of films that seem to be up themselves and seem to be very much in a bubble, and that bubble that's evolved over time to be a certain kind of film, and certain things are respectable and certain things are not. Now, Tarantino came up from the working classes. His mum and dad split when he was born. He's brought up by his mother. He grew up in the rough places. He understands the audience from the kind of working classes, which means the kind of more art house kind of filmmaking isn't really his passion. It's not really what he does. Even though, as a director, the kind of postmodernism, self-aware stuff is very middle class that he does. It's very middle class. So he was obviously influenced by them because he was reading lots of magazines from those cultures and lots of articles like Paul and Keel and things like that. He's steeped in that as well, but he's also steeped in the kind of audience side. So that's why he could actually, as well as having talent, that's why he could obviously connect with audiences, because he knew what the audiences wanted in a way that a lot of filmmakers don't really. They understand what their small audience wants. That's it. So the book is from that perspective, which is good and bad, because he gets certain films really wrong, and like a lot of people, he's got his biases about certain things that sometimes are good, sometimes are not so good. So you get certain comments about certain films, you're thinking, I think you misunderstood this film, or you wanted something from this film that the people involved were not interested in at all. Like, he doesn't seem to get point blank. Like, he doesn't get point blank. He's or Burman. I mean, he does a chapter on Deliverance, which just makes him look like he's so fixated on the Burt Reynolds character and what his arc should have been that he misses the point of the rest of the film and just says the rest of the film doesn't work because they're not focused on this character. And it's like, no, that character wasn't even the main character. You've just interpreted this film on your own way. It's not the film is. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, that's just that's like sitting in a pub with someone talking about films and realising they've been off in one or something. It's like, it's a misunderstanding. I don't think he gets Burman anyway. Like, anytime Burman comes up in this book, he seems to not get Burman, because Burman is the perfect example of that middle class director who's steeped in literature and steeped in myth and steeped in lots of things that you can be obsessed by if you come from a more comfortable class. Even though Burman grew up in World War II and lots of other things, but he's kind of someone who kept on educating himself, like Tarantino does. But Tarantino's educated himself in a kind of very American perspective, a very American. I want the kind of genre constraints in place perspective, that kind of no nonsense Americana. Well, a lot of the film industry theory comes from Britain, because Britain and France is kind of focus a lot of critical theory on filmmaking. A lot of the influential stuff came from Britain and France. America took some of those theories and did their own thing with them, but it's not the heartland of criticism. And obviously, so there's a kind of disconnect between certain perspectives, but it's just life. I mean, people have different perspectives. America has always been much more of a kind of country that's much more into the, what does this do? What's his point? What's his purpose? That's the kind of mentality of America compared to Britain, which is a bit more. It's ruled by a class that's been ruling for centuries, so you can get a bit more esoteric and a bit more existential. Same with France. It's just two different cultures and different things of what they want. And a lot of film theories and a lot of filmmakers have been influenced by the French and British system, even though the energy of American directors and other countries' directors seem to be much more prominent than a lot of British and French directors. Although there's been lots of really good directors from those countries. You know, France has Bresson, you know, who's pretty much better than anyone in America. Like, ever. So, there is a kind of Tarantino definitely in this book is focused upon the Americana experience and what it means. So as an outsider, it's interesting to read. interesting to get that perspective. And sometimes he just seems wrong-headed with certain films. But it's a perspective you can understand reading the book. Like, he's coming from this point of view, and I'm coming from films from another point of view, and we just see films slightly differently. I think that's really on the reviews. You've got pretty good reviews of the book because it's quite a decent book. But some people who say there's lots of things that are wrong here with Stevie's, it's a different point of view. Your point of view is just as flawed as his point of view in different ways. Because I mean, the European system of criticism has a lot of flaws in it. A lot of the time, they read into stuff way too much, and things like that. There's nothing here. You're. It's almost like a game of how can we extract more meaning to say we're smart. Well, in the Tarantino book, it's much more like, what does this actually mean, and what's the point? If it doesn't mean anything, why are we interested in it? It's a different perspective. It's a much more no-nonsense perspective, very American. So they both have their good points and bad points. And if they go too far in either direction, like no-nonsense, so there's almost no subtext, or reading into subtext everywhere, it can become a problem because it goes away from reality. So it's just two perspectives. But it's quite interesting to see a much more kind of working class perspective in film seen, because you don't see it very often. Nowadays, in most perspectives, they come from middle class fans who are kiss-arsey to Marvel and DC and stuff, and understand that people are into their comic books and overgrown children, basically. And it's a very middle class. American film criticism is very middle class at the moment. It's very different from what Tarantino was writing here. It's really different. So it's actually a bit of fresh air on that kind of thing. Because it's like, well, I don't agree with everything he says, but at least it's honest point of view. At least he's saying, like, I like this, I don't like this, but this film. At least I can get behind it. Like, that's at least an honest point of view. You know, it's like it's quite interesting to see how it splits from criticism on the mainstream at the moment. It's just kind of interesting because it's a much healthier approach, I find, than what we get with what's available now. It's just like, I mean, go online, most criticism is basically arse kissing to the studios, and arse kissing to films that have no real depth to them. I like the Marvel films, the DC films, on the main, but try to find some depth to a lot of these films is quite difficult. There's just nothing there. So this book actually looks at the 70s stuff. You get things in like Rolling Thunder and why Tarantino likes it, and why what he also says can be criticisms of it, and why he says, like, he looks into the original script with Paul Schrader and how it changed, and in some ways how the changes could be good or bad. Like, it's a neutral perspective. It's like, it's just different. It looks into hardcore and talks about how it starts and how it ends, and anyone who's seen hardcore knows the second half's worse than the first half. It's like, even Schrader admits it pretty, like, yeah, we screwed up the ending. And that mean, Tarantino was pretty brutal about the second half of the film and how it was Schrader's fault in some ways. But I think that hardcore, it was a mistake Schrader had to make to move on as director and realise, I should not do that again. We compromised and realised he shouldn't have compromised. He made a mistake. And he doesn't. Tarantino also is like critical of Schrader in some ways about some genre shortcuts he does in his script writing, which I think he's not sure if it's looking down genre, which for Tarantino is a big sin, or lack of interest. I think it's lack of interest. I think he's got something he wants to do, and he has to get from A to B. He's more interested in the character stuff than the genre stuff. That's my perspective of Schrader. Anyway, because I'm a big Schrader fan. But he's actually pretty fair to Schrader. He's like, a lot of the films that Schrader wrote were not treated well. He's actually pretty aware that Schrader was like the big engine of 70s cinema in lots of ways. There were other people like Robert Towne around and Milius, but Schrader was like an engine to a lot of directors to push them through. He covers Sisters, and he's pretty fair on that one. Sisters is an early De Palma film that has a much better first half than second half. Though I really like the second half, but it's not strong. It's more interesting, culty and weird In the first half, it's much stronger and genre based. Which I think for Tarantino, it's like he's much more interested in a good story genre based than going weird in a film. And he's interested in De Palma, how De Palma's kind of emotionally distanced from his own genre in some ways, which is quite good because he's a De Palma fan, and so am I in it. But it's like as you get older, you learn to be critical of people you really like in a way that's healthy. Like he knows that De Palma's not a fan of Hitchcock beyond Psycho. Everyone thinks De Palma's a massive Hitchcock fan for everything. No, he's not. He's interested in certain things. And he covers Taxi Driver and the whole thing about the white pimp and how it's not really, doesn't really exist. And he also covers the fact that he watched a lot of films, exploitation films, with a black audience, and their perspective is different from the white audiences. And he says that some of the directors' press comments, as they're trying to cater to their own people, were a bit disingenuous. Like, how can you not think that Travis Bickle massacre at the end would not lead to cheers from the audience? It's that thing of a perspective of a director who knows his audience, but the one criticism I can see is he's so focused on that audience. Sometimes he's not looking at art's very multifaceted. The one audience can go one way, another audience can go another way. There's like in a really complicated film, you're going to get lots of different perspectives. And Tarantino, I think, focuses on his perspective, and that's kind of the thing in the book that's kind of tricky in a sense that he's so focused on his perspective that he kind of misses, in the case of Deliverance and Taxi Driver, he kind of misses when he's talking about them, that there's more going on. He understands there's a lot going on in them, but he doesn't quite cross over to be able to explain how the perspectives are complicated and he's just focused on one of them. And he doesn't quite know how to articulate the other ones that are not really part of his interest. So that they become almost criticism of the film rather than that's just not my interest. And that's kind of the big problem in the book, I think, is like he sometimes doesn't get the perspective of others, and he's clear what his perspective is, and it's like there's a massive gap there. You're missing some obvious stuff here, which you can at least acknowledge and say this is my perspective. It's that kind of thing that's in the book that floats through the book quite a bit, and it's the kind of weakness of the book, because the book you get a lot of stuff about him growing up, but the different friendships and different things, people he knew from different audiences and things like that. You get a lot of interesting things, but he's so tied to what he saw then. In some ways, he can't quite move on from that. And you can see that in some of the films, like the kind of things he criticises, like Deliverance from, makes you think that Django Unchained was his version of Deliverance, where he did have the big massacre at the end and did have this flawed character learn to be a tough guy, and it's like, and to me that was the worst part of that film, because it was like, well, what's that going to do with the rest of the film? It's the kind of thing with the kind of exploitation mind that he has sometimes comes through in these criticisms that are, it's like, that's not really what they're trying to do. And then it comes across also in his films, or sometimes it's like he accepts something sophisticated like in Glorious Bastards, and then he throws it all away in an ending that's nonsensical. And it's like he is kind of trapped within that kind of set, like how he's grown up, that sometimes he can step back from being like Pulp Fiction, and sometimes, like in the case of Django Unchained, he's trapped by his upbringing in a way that means that films become just nonsensical. Where in something like Hateful Eight, the gory big ending was appropriate for what that film was and what the characters were. In Django Unchained, it seemed to be coming out of a lot of plot mechanics coming out of nowhere that had nothing to do with reality, just because he needed these plot mechanics for whatever he wanted to do, and it's like, that wouldn't happen, what the hell? And that's what weird Django Unchained is, like when Django doesn't get killed after killing DiCaprio's character and all those people, and it's like, in what genre film would he not get killed in? So he kind of Tarantino breaks his own rules of what he complains about other filmmakers in his own film, because like, why is he not dead? there's just that kind of feeling to the book. Sometimes it's like anybody, they've got their own rules of what's good and what's bad, and sometimes those rules aren't consistent. But it is an interesting book. I would definitely say I reckon you read it and try and figure out where it's coming from, because there is a lot of good stuff there. It's just there's some stuff you can go, what? But that's kind of rare. Most of the time he kind of keeps track of his emotions, and it's just sometimes there's some throwaway lines that are, oh, he damns some films and praises other films that are a bit weird, and it's like, you didn't really explain that, that's odd. There's things like that. I mean, that's the same with anybody ever talked about films. There's always stuff they like that you go, eh? I'm like that. There's plenty of films I like that most people don't go, huh? It's just like a personal perspective book. And like any personal perspective book, there are things you can pick at. But it is an interesting book. It is definitely worth reading. And it is definitely refreshing, because it's different. It's not the kind of polite book you get through certain critics who are not quite being honest with their perspectives, I feel. So, hope you enjoyed this. I'll be back soon with another video. That's me for now. Bye.